Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Michaela Peters. I don't know where my hat went from yesterday, which was really sad, so now I'm wearing a scarf and then I'm just gonna hope I don't freeze as I'm walking home. So today was really exciting because I got my nails done. Okay, well, that was part of it, but so the reason I don't like wearing glasses on these is the glare starts driving me crazy. Okay, I kind of need them today because I feel like I'm going to try to read some stuff. But today was exciting because I have my first paid partnership, which is going to actually be about getting healthcare in Finland as a foreign person, which is super relevant for me since I went to a doctor's appointment yesterday and I actually have more doctor's appointments coming up. So I was thinking about actually signing up for this health insurance myself and seeing what the price difference is going to be. My first appointment I had where I didn't have any insurance, and then the second one and third one and subsequent one will be with me having health insurance. So I'm going to talk about that. But today, I think I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about my job because I realized that I don't really talk about this a lot on my channel. I kind of have this weird policy where I don't really like to talk about work outside of work. I don't know if that's because I've got this European vibe going on, but I think this is what it is. I don't feel like I'm that smart. Like, I feel like there are plenty of smarter people than me in the world. However, I do understand that I work a job that most people do not understand, even though, again, I don't really think it's that difficult for myself. And I joke all the time, like, I'm usually somewhere where I'm the dumbest person working at that place. I guess that's about that whole thing where it's like, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Probably if you're the dumbest person in the room, maybe that could be true too. But actually, no, I don't agree with that. I remember when I went to Kyrgyzstan, for instance, there was this one guy, his name was Chris. He actually went on to be a foreign service officer, shout out to him, and he was feeling very inadequate and sort of like, oh, my Russian is really bad compared to a lot of you in the group. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm older than you and I've been doing this a bit longer, and I'm like, you should be the happiest because it means you have the most to learn. So I think about it in that sense. But today, I just had my one-on-one meeting with my manager's manager, so aka the head of the analytics department where I work, and I sometimes get nervous with these meetings because I'm not really sure how to conduct them, but I'm able to say enough funny things to get him to laugh, which usually helps ease how I'm feeling in these meetings. And I'm just going to give some examples of some of the questions that I asked because I think it's kind of entertaining. It was also interesting because, he made a really good point, which I think is very common with Americans, and it's that a lot of Americans like to keep working because it's how they derive a lot of their meaning and purpose in life. And I had actually just read an article about this, which talked about this woman who had started a business, was in her, I can't remember if it was 30s or 40s. She was not that bougie, and she had become a millionaire and just, was trying to still live kind of simply. But a lot of her problems related to managing her business were problems that people could no longer relate to anymore. And so sort of like being very successful carried with it, I don't even want to necessarily say a stigma, but just a set of problems that she felt like people couldn't necessarily relate to. And with this, I just kind of started thinking, because in this meeting I just had with the head honcho, if you will, the manager's manager, we were talking about just like career stuff in general, and I asked him kind of questions about his career. Like, I ask a lot of personal, professional questions, if that makes sense. Like, I'm going to actually just read the list, because usually what I do is Google questions to ask my manager, and then I write them down, and then I try to get through all of them in the meeting, and he's like, you bring me very interesting questions, and I'm like, I try, because there was one meeting where I didn't prepare for it, and I felt like it went terribly, so now I prepare for them, so it makes me feel less nervous. Because there is something, like, even though I feel like he's intimidating and all my managers are approachable, I do feel like they're all approachable. I still feel intimidated because, I'm newer in my role, and it still feels like I'm trying to figure out a lot of things. I think that's actually a lot of why I like doing this YouTube channel, because it did have to teach me how to get better at public speaking. And it was funny, I had a friend message me and be like, oh, you were so natural on these videos, and I'm like, well, just go look back at my first video. It's not quite the same. So I feel like there's a skill in being able to explain your thoughts, and I know my thoughts are not always super in a sort of logical order because this is a lot more stream of consciousness, but honestly, when I go back and I listen to my own videos, I think that it is a lot more interesting because of how stream of consciousness is, but maybe that's just me. Okay. So we did have layoffs at our company, and I kind of asked about that, and he's like, I wouldn't be worried about that because apparently it wasn't like a rack and stack thing so much as it was just we started having skill set mismatches and we needed to adjust to the company's needs. So, I mean, that kind of makes sense. And he's like, I tell my kids this all the time, but like you should generally have a pretty good sense of where you are meeting the needs of the company and where you are having a knowledge gap, as he said. And so I started thinking, like, I do feel like I'm doing my job well enough. I would kind of tell my parents a lot, like, I'm constantly worried about getting fired, but that's more of my own insecurity around working a 9 to 5 job and it being challenging for me, feeling like I'm plugged in for 8 hours of the day, because I definitely don't feel that way. However, one of my friends said something very smart, which is like, he was explaining how we don't get paid for the number of hours a day we're working. We get paid for the expertise, especially as salaried employees, the expertise that we bring and the speed and agility at which we can do our job. And I thought that was a really good point because, as I say, I'm usually on call 8 hours a day, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm being productive all of those 8 hours. It kind of depends on, what the business needs are, when the deadlines are, and honestly, doing anything that's that cerebral for 8 hours a day a lot of times can be challenging, even though I did do that a lot while I was a student. Although I do feel like I took a lot more breaks while I was a student, whereas like I said, like with working, you're a lot more on call and need to be available all the time. So other questions I asked are related to what the goals are for our department. A lot of that's just related to meeting business needs, which can change. We also have this one on-site visit because we work remotely where we go and meet up with everybody. And so usually it's in Chicago, and it's historically been in Chicago, but this year they want to focus more on team building and less on education. It was super dense. It was like being in a bunch of computer science classes for a week straight. It was so hard. I just felt like I was trying to stay awake because my brain was so on fire. But this year they want to focus more on team building. So apparently we're thinking about going to a different city, and it is still unknown where. So then I also asked about qualities of new hires. A lot of that has to do with, I feel like that's the stereotypical kind of answers where it's a lot more like, problem solving, being able to learn and adapt, and I wrote down creative thinking, or not creative. They do say creativity sometimes. He didn't say that. He said critical thinking, independent problem solving, being curious, working on a team. Yeah, all those things. I think those make sense. Then I asked about his management style, and he said he thinks he's hands-on, but he tries to not be micromanaging. And I was like, well, that's good, because generally people don't enjoy being micromanaging, and they don't enjoy being micromanaged. So I was like, good idea. But it seems like he really has a love for a lot of the technical stuff, and so that's why he likes to be so hands-on. And that was one of the things we talked about, and I told him I did remember this about when I worked at NASA, is there's this phenomenon by which a lot of the leaders, so it's funny, I'm going to talk about my job, but I'm just speaking more about career stuff in general, but whatever, maybe it could be interesting for people who want to know about American career stuff. But they get very into this, like, there's this leadership versus individual contributor IC, if you will, and how a lot of times there starts to be a trade-off, because what this manager was explaining is that he felt like he had a lot more internal satisfaction when he was an individual contributor and writing code and all of that than being in a leadership position, even though he feels like there has been a lot of fulfillment and satisfaction from being in a leadership position. But this is a guy who was also like did his PhD, did a lot of research, like I think it was like computer and electrical engineering type of work. So yeah, I get it, because it's like I've heard the same thing at NASA where people really miss being very into the technical stuff, and then that kind of gets removed once you're in a leadership position and you're just trying to, keep tabs on a lot of different things, and you're less like into the nitty-gritty of this type of technical work and just more on a surface level of trying to make sure that everything is in line. However, you still do need to have a lot of technical knowledge to make sure that everybody is doing their job how they need to be doing their job. So that makes sense. I think you're still utilizing one with the other. I asked about a 5-year plan, and he was like, well, I'm supposed to be thinking more about retirement than that. And I'm like, oh, well, do you want to retire? And he's like, no, because he feels like he has a lot of purpose in his life with working. And I understood that, and that was kind of what I was getting at earlier in this discussion. So I'm like, well, what about, he's like, I need something to get me out of bed in the morning. And I was like, well, what about golfing? Or what about, I don't know, any other hobbies? And he's like, he just really enjoys what he does, which I think is cool, honestly. And like, I do relate to that because, like I say, one of the biggest reasons with one of my issues with leaving the US more or less permanently is like, I finally found a job that I really do love. And, you know, I know this because I've worked a lot of different internships and I've done a lot of different things. I've done market research, I've worked with budgeting, I've worked with contracting, I worked with program planning. I'd say those were the primary things I did, but now I actually do work with data analytics. It is what I went to school for. It's sufficiently challenging for me, but still interesting at the same time. So I really do love doing it. And so again, this is one of my biggest qualms is like, it took me like more or less 8 years or something. You know, I started interning and working more professional roles beginning in 2016 with my first internship, which was for a reinsurance company. And I didn't get this internship here at the company where I am now until 2022. Like, we're talking like, you know, 6 years later, and then I didn't start working full time until, you know, the next year. So it's like 7 years later that I finally found something like, oh, okay, I could see myself doing this for like day in, day out. So, you know, there is that. And I also just feel like my company is sufficiently chill and I don't feel like overly stressed out or micromanaged. Like, I feel like I get my work done and they're happy with it, and like there's clear enough communication. And because it's remote, there's very little social politicking, which I honestly had a hard time with when I was in the office. Because I'm autistic, but I mean, no, that's probably honestly why. That's why I always liked school. I always felt like school was really independent, and right now I just feel like my job is very independent. It's like, here's the assignment, do the assignment, and it's like, here it is, and then you give it back, and then instead of getting a grade, you just get verbal feedback. Like, it's very similar, and so, like, I just love that structure because it works for me. Let's see. Some of it was just goals, asking if he had any regrets with his career journey. It was interesting because with that question, he did talk a little bit about, like, it seems like he's like, oh, well, my research, you know, wasn't so applicable to what I did in my professional career. And I'm like, I mean, it do be like that, man. No, I didn't say that, but I kind of thought it. Because a lot of times your research is going to be very focused on one specific thing. And I feel like academia and professional, like, corporate work life, like, are not that compatible with each other. That's why I do both of them separately, because I like both of them in different ways, although I probably secretly like academia more, but academia is just a lot harder to make a living off of. So, and unfortunately, at some point you do have to worry about that. I tried to avoid it for many years of my life, and I was successful, and then I stopped being successful. Yeah, I'd say that's probably all the interesting questions that I asked. But yeah, you know, it's like, I do like my job because what I do is data analytics. Like, I look at data, I work with data, I visualize data, I am like, does this data make sense? I talk about the data, like, it's all just like, here's data set, deal with it. And instead of it being like, slam my head against the wall data science stuff that I'm too dumb for, it's like visualization, and I can handle that, and it's sufficiently challenging. So, I don't know. I do think that that's one of the things that is really hard for me about leaving the U.S. Is just, like, I really have enjoyed my career, and this is one of the things that people talk about with coming to the U.S. is it's usually for career opportunities. And so as much as I may enjoy the lifestyle in another country like Finland, like, the career thing, like, my philosophy on work has always been this, and I feel like I've said this one other time. At the end of the day, I need to not want to kill myself or somebody else. So what I mean is, it's like, you enjoy your work enough that you feel a sense of peace at the end of every day. You don't feel like a sense of frustration and hatred towards the world. And I will say that my work does not give me that. Probably my work at the restaurant gives me that a little bit more than this job. That has to do with a bunch of dumb social politicking stuff that I don't like. Who gets better sections, and mostly who gets better sections, and how people get treated, and the fact that I can't quite figure out how to network properly with everybody. That would be what that has to do with. Yeah. But, yeah, so I just want to make a video about, you know, why I like my job, and, like, what these professional conversations look like, because I find them kind of entertaining, and it's like, this is so basic to me, but maybe it's not to other people, so I don't know. I hope that's interesting enough. And then I'm going to focus more on health insurance, I think. Health insurance. So, Until next time, bye.